The late afternoon sun, hanging heavy and golden in the western sky, poured its honeyed light over the sprawling expanse of South Point Motors. It was a light that seemed engineered for sales brochures glinting off waxed hoods and chromed grilles, transforming rows of sedans, SUVs, and trucks into a dazzling landscape of polished steel and shimmering glass. The air hummed with the curated melody of success, the soft murmur of negotiations, the occasional ring of a desk phone, the solid, satisfying thud of a car door closing on a potential future. To any casual observer, it was a portrait of American commerce at its most vibrant and efficient. Customers moved through the lot in pairs and small clusters, guided by salespeople in crisp shirts and name tags that caught the sun. A young couple peered into the spacious interior of a family SUV, the wife gently bouncing a toddler on her hip. A few yards away, an older man in a baseball cap ran an appreciative hand along the flank of a gleaming pickup truck, listening as an eager salesman detailed torque and towing capacity. Laughter erupted from a nearby group celebrating a finalized deal, the sound mingling with the soft classic rock piped through discreet outdoor speakers. It was a scene of seamless routine, a well-rehearsed dance where every role was understood, and the rhythm was set by the steady tick of the sales board. At the far periphery of this orchestrated bustle, away from the main flow of foot traffic leading to the showroom's grand glass entrance, a modest, slate-gray sedan rolled to a quiet stop. It went unnoticed, an unremarkable silhouette against the glittering inventory. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. His name was Taryn. He stood tall, his posture relaxed yet carrying an innate poise. His attire was deliberate in its understatement. A white button-down shirt, impeccably crisp, tucked into dark, flat front trousers, Achon trousers. His shoes were leather, polished to a subtle sheen but built for comfort, not flash. He took a moment, one hand resting on the roof of his car, his dark, observant eyes sweeping across the panorama of his new domain. His gaze was analytical, missing nothing. The organization of the lot, the body language of the sales teams, the ease with which customers navigated the space. There was no expression of ownership on his face, no prideful gleam. Instead, his look was one of quiet assessment, the calm focus of a conductor arriving before the orchestra to sense the room. Taryn had finalized the acquisition of South Point Motors 6 days prior. The paperwork was signed, the funds transferred, the legalities neatly filed away in a downtown office. He was, on paper, the sole owner. Yet he had instructed his interim legal and financial contacts to withhold the standard announcement to the staff. No introductory email, no scheduled visit from the new boss. He believed that the truest measure of an enterprise was not found in its quarterly reports or its polished marketing, but in its unguarded culture, the rhythms and interactions that flourished when authority was presumed to be elsewhere. He wanted the raw, unfiltered truth of an ordinary Tuesday. With a final, almost imperceptible adjustment of his wristwatch, he closed his car door. The sound of soft, solid clicks swallowed by the lot's ambient noise, and began to walk. His pace was leisurely, unhurried. He moved between the aisles of vehicles, a shadow among the glitter, pausing here to glance at a sticker price, there to note the cleanliness of a windshield. Employees passed him offering polite, automatic smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes before hurrying toward clients they had already pegged as more promising. He was just another browser, another variable in the day's equation to be politely managed or efficiently filtered out. The automatic doors of the main showroom hissed open as he approached, releasing a wave of cool, climate-controlled air scented with the dual fragrances of luxury, rich leather and citrus-scented cleaner. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The music was softer here, the lighting more dramatic, spotlighting the flagship models displayed on rotating platforms like jewels on velvet. The buzz was more intense, concentrated. The salespeople darted between their cubicles and the coffee station, voices a low cacophony of pitches and promises. Digital screens on the walls flashed through slick promotional videos. It was the heart of the operation, and its pulse was rapid. Taryn entered this ecosystem and simply stopped, just inside the threshold, allowing the flow of commerce to part around him. He took a deep, steadying breath, absorbing the details. The too forceful laugh of a salesman closing a deal. The weary slump of a receptionist's shoulders at 4:30 p.m. The eager, nervous energy of a junior associate shadowing a senior, Ray. For a few long seconds he was invisible, a ghost in his own machine, witnessing the unvarnished mechanics of the business he now owned. He saw the practiced routines, the genuine smiles to some customers, the calculated, dismissive once-overs given to others. A faint, thoughtful line appeared between his brows. He had come for a genuine sense of the place, and as he finally moved from his spot near the door, taking his first few silent steps onto the polished showroom floor, the final, fading echoes of the day's ordinary rhythm played out. It was the last moment of pure observation, the final heartbeat of calm before an unseen current, sparked by a single terrible assumption, would surge through the room and change everything. The routine day was about to fracture. The cool, conditioned air of the South Point Motors showroom carried a specific scent, a blend of new car leather, vinyl, and the faint, astringent tang of glass cleaner. It was the perfume of potential, of big-ticket transactions waiting to happen. Taryn moved through this atmosphere like a scholar in a library, his hands clasped lightly behind his back, his gaze absorbing details beyond the manufacturer's specs plastered on windshields. He noted the scuff mark on the base of a pillar that hadn't been touched up, the slightly uneven spacing of the luxury models on the central turntables, the way a cluster of salespeople leaned a little too comfortably near the coffee station, their attention inward, not on the floor. Across the expanse of polished floor in a glass-walled office that projected authority like a lighthouse, Margaret Sinclair was conducting her own audit. Seated behind a minimalist desk, her focus was split between the financial dashboard glowing on her monitor and the live tableau of her domain beyond the glass. At 47, Margaret had built her reputation not on warmth, but on a formidable, unassailable efficiency. She had risen from a finance intern to general manager by mastering a simple creed. Time was money, and distractions were thieves. Her appearance was a testament to this philosophy. Every strand of her ash blonde hair in place, her navy blazer sharp enough to cut, her makeup a mask of impeccable neutrality. She was less a person in that moment than the living embodiment of the dealership's bottom line. Her eyes, pale and discerning, swept the showroom floor in a practiced pattern. They cataloged the elderly couple being gently steered toward a sensible sedan by a senior salesman. Good. They flicked to a young man in a hoodie awkwardly peering into a sports car he clearly couldn't afford. Time waster, redirect him. Then they landed on Taryn. He was standing by the premium SUV lineup, not sitting inside, not hunting for a salesman, just looking. His posture was relaxed, but it was the wrong kind of relaxation for this environment. It wasn't the eager slouch of a dreamer or the nervous energy of a first-time buyer. It was a calm, appraising stillness that, to Margaret's calibrated instincts, signaled a lack of urgent intent. Her gaze performed a swift unconscious triage. Crisp shirt, but no visible logo. Clean, simple trousers. Shoes polished, but practical. So, no flash of a luxury watch, no jingle of expensive keys in his hand. He carried no coffee cup from a high-end place, held no phone to his ear in a performative display of busyness. He was, in her quick and definitive assessment, a browser, a classic looky-loo. In her mental ledger, his potential value plummeted to near zero. A faint tremor of irritation passed through her. The late afternoon push was critical for hitting daily metrics, and her team's energy was a finite resource. Allowing a browser to wander unchallenged was an invitation for others to do the same, sapping focus from genuine buyers. It was a leak in the hull, and she was the captain. Decision made, she placed her tablet down with a precise tap and stood. The sound of her approach was a declaration in itself. The click-click-click of her heels on the tile was a staccato rhythm of ownership, each strike marking territory. Salespeople subtly straightened as she passed. A junior associate scurried out of her path. She didn't walk to Terrence so much as she intercepted him, her trajectory cutting him off from the next vehicle he might have approached. She stopped just inside his personal space, forcing him to turn his attention from the car to her, establishing immediate physical dominance. "Can I help you?" Her voice was not loud, but it was blade-sharp, slicing through the showroom's ambient murmur. It was not a question born of hospitality, but a challenge, a demand for justification. Taryn turned. His movement was unhurried, completing his observation of the SUV's line before meeting her eyes. He offered a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach his own eyes, which remained watchful. Just browsing. Thank you. Margaret didn't smile back. Her eyes completed their second, more detailed scan. She noted the quality of the cotton in his shirt, the lack of a wedding band, the calm steadiness of his hands. Her conclusion solidified. A browsing, she repeated, the word made flat and inert in her mouth, stripped of any positive connotation. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible sigh, the sound of someone forced to state the obvious to an uncomprehending child. Well, she began, her tone shifting into a practiced, dismissive cadence, if you're looking for financing options, our team can guide you. She paused, letting the condescension of the phrase looking for hang for a beat. Then she leaned forward the slightest fraction, her voice dropping into a cooler, more confidential register that was somehow more hostile than open confrontation. But unless you're serious about buying today, we prefer to focus on our active customers. The subtext was crystalline. You are not active. You are not serious. You are a drain on our resources. Cease. She held his gaze, expecting to see the familiar reactions. Defensive bluster, embarrassed retreat, mumbled excuses. She was an expert at applying this precise pressure to make non-buyers self-evict. Taryn's expression remained placid. Only a faint, thoughtful narrowing of his eyes betrayed that he had heard not just the words, but the entire symphony of judgment beneath them. He absorbed the insult without a flinch, as if it were simply more data. I appreciate the information, he said, his voice still calm, still even. A masterclass in not taking the bait. I'd like to look around a bit more, if that's okay. The refusal to crumble or comply irritated her. It was a pebble in her perfectly tuned machine. Her lips compressed, thinning into a stark line of disapproval. The veneer of professional courtesy already thin now cracked. I just don't touch anything without asking first, she said, her voice curt and final. It was a directive one gave to a child in a museum, not a potential client in a place of business. Without waiting for a response, she turned, the sharp pivot of her heels echoing her frustration. The click, click, click receded as she marched back toward her glass cage, already mentally filing the interaction under resolved. She had drawn a boundary. She had asserted control. The disruption was contained. Behind her, Taryn stood motionless for a long moment, watching her go. The polite mask finally settled into something more neutral, more analytical. The first data point of his unfiltered review was now conclusively recorded. The culture of this place, from the top down, was one of swift, arrogant judgment. The welcome mat, he noted, was only for those who already looked like they belonged. He turned back to the SUV, but he was no longer seeing the vehicle. He was seeing the fragile, invisible architecture of prejudice that held the entire operation aloft. And he knew with a quiet certainty that it was about to be stress-tested. He was an active impediment to the sacred flow of commerce. Taryn absorbed the word, his head tilting a fraction. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, but it had shed its previous softness, gaining a density, a quiet authority that seemed to physically push back against her advance. I'm not distracting anyone. I have every right to be here. A dry, humorless scoff escaped her. It was the sound of certainty confronting absurdity. Look, I've seen this before. She launched into the mantra, the script she used to clear the floor of undesirables. Of people coming in, wasting time, pretending they're interested. We're running a business here. She took another step, erasing the last bit of professional distance, her voice dropping to a harsh, confidential whisper meant to intimidate. If you're not buying, you need to go. The battlefield was defined. On one side, her combustible, righteous frustration fueled by years of unassailable authority. On the other, his immovable, tranquil resolve. The air grew thick, charged with the static of their clashing will. A man nearby test-driving the idea of a minivan with his wife paused and glanced over, his cheerful expression fading into concern. Margaret registered the look, and her anger found a new fuel. Now this distraction was leaking, contaminating the real customers. Taryn's gaze never wavered. He didn't retreat a millimeter. He stood his ground, a rock in her churning stream. When he finally spoke, his words were slow, deliberate, and precision, guided. I think you're making some assumptions about me. The word assumptions acted like a spark on gasoline. It implied a flaw in her judgment, a blindness in her perfect system. Her carefully maintained composure cracked. Her eyes narrowed into glacial slits, her lips a pale, bloodless lime. And I think I know my job, she snapped, the words sharp and brittle. She drew herself up to her full height, delivering the ultimatum that had never, ever failed. Either show me you're serious, or I'll handle this my way. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum sucking in the surrounding noise. Terrence simply looked at her. In his eyes, she saw no fear, no anger, no submission. She saw only a profound, unsettling calm and a deep, almost pitying understanding. He gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't agreement. It was an acknowledgement of a point of no return being crossed. So the nod seemed to say, this is the path you choose. The final fragile pretense of a normal business day shattered at their feet. The next move, irrevocably, was hers. The silence that followed Margaret's ultimatum was not empty. It was dense, charged with a collision of two irreconcilable realities. In Terrence, he was a man exercising a fundamental right of consumer capitalism, to look, to consider, to exist in a commercial space without immediate intent to purchase. In Margaret's, he was an algorithmic error, a glitch in her system of value assessment that refused to auto-correct. His calm nod was the spark. Her pride was the tinder. "Handle it your way?" Taryn asked, his voice still frighteningly even, a flat plane against her jagged cliff. "What exactly does that mean?" He had called her bluff by asking for specifics, and in doing so, forced her to voice the unspeakable protocol. She stiffened, straightening her blazer, a gesture of reclaiming armor that had already been breached. "It means I have to ensure my team and our paying customers feel comfortable," she declared, her eyes scanning the room to invoke a phantom jury of her peers. "And right now, you're making people uncomfortable, wandering without a clear purpose." Taryn's head tilted. A single eyebrow arched in an expression of pure, undiluted skepticism. It was a simple gesture that dismantled her entire premise. "Uncomfortable?" he repeated, letting the word sit in the air before dissecting it. "Because I'm looking at cars in a car dealership?" The logical absurdity of her position, when stated so plainly, reverberated through the showroom. A few of the pretending not to listen employees shifted on their feet. The minivan father cleared his throat awkwardly. Margaret's flush deepened from pink to a blotchy crimson. He had backed her into a corner with mere reason, and cornered animals attack. She closed the final distance between them, her voice dropping to a venomous, conspiratorial whisper meant for him alone, yet sharp enough to be caught by the nearest desk. "A look. I don't know what your deal is." Her eyes were hard, glittering with the conviction of her prejudice. "But we've had enough people come in here, waste our time, ask for test drives, then vanish when it's time to talk numbers." She had stated her core belief aloud. He was, by his very demeanor and appearance, a time waster, a category, not an individual. Taryn did not argue the point. He simply held her gaze for a long, excruciating moment, his own eyes reflecting back her fury like a still pool. Then the most devastating reaction possible. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It was the smile of a scholar who has just found the exact flaw in a long-held theory. It was a smile of profound, weary disappointment. "I don't recall asking for a test drive," he said, his tone almost conversational. "I'm just observing." "Is that against your policy?" He had dismantled her straw man. He had never asked for a thing, only for the space to look. Her accusation was a phantom. The flush on her neck crawled upward. Across the room, the young salesman, Kyle, who had been hovering in a state of anxious paralysis, finally stirred. His conscience overrode his fear. He took a half step forward, a hand rising slightly. Margaret, maybe I could just..." He began, his voice thin. Margaret's head snapped toward him. The glare she delivered was not one of a manager to an employee, but of a queen to a traitor. It was pure, silencing fury. Kyle's hand fell, his words dying in his throat. He looked down, defeated. Howard observed this exchange, the microtransaction of crushed decency. He filed it away. "You're disrupting my staff," Margaret hissed, turning her venom back on him, now with the evidence of Kyle's attempted intervention. "And I won't allow it." Taryn nodded slowly, as if considering this. "I'd be happy to speak to someone higher up if you think I'm an issue." It was the checkmate move, and she was too blind to see it. The challenge to her ultimate authority triggered a dry, brittle laugh that held no humor. "Higher up," she spat, the words dripping with scorn. "I am the manager. There is no one else you need to speak to." Taryn gave another slow, deliberate nod. "Good to know," he said softly. He had his answer. The problem was not a rogue policy or a stressed employee. The problem was the source. The head was poisoned. Seeing that her words, her threats, her very presence had failed to move this immovable object, Margaret's last vestige of professional control evaporated. A wild, frantic light entered her eyes. She turned on her heel, the movement sharp and jerky, and marched to the nearest sales desk. The entire room watched as she snatched the white corded phone from its cradle. The electronic dial tone was a shrill scream in the quiet. Taryn watched, his hands sliding into his pockets, a portrait of resigned curiosity. "You're calling the police," he stated, his voice carrying a note of sad astonishment, over someone looking at cars. She ignored him, her finger stabbing the keypad with violent precision. Beep, beep, beep. Each tone was a nail in the coffin of her career. She spoke into the receiver, her voice adopting a performative official calm that rang utterly false. Yes, hello. This is Margaret Sinclair, general manager at South Point Motors on the Boulevard. She paused, listening. I have a man here who's being uncooperative. He's refusing to leave the premises despite multiple direct requests. Yes. Thank you. The click of the handset being returned to its cradle was the loudest sound in the world. She turned back to Taryn, her shoulders squaring with the triumph of someone who has just launched a nuclear missile to swat a fly. The authorities will be here shortly, she announced, her voice ringing with vindication. I suggest you wait outside. Taryn didn't shift his weight. He didn't look toward the door. He simply met her triumphant gaze and asked, with the innocence of a true scholar, why would I wait outside? I haven't done anything wrong. The facade shattered. You're trespassing, she cried, her voice rising, breaking its controlled pitch, becoming shrill. You've been asked to leave and you're refusing. That's enough. The final word echoed in the cavernous space. And in the ringing silence that followed, Taryn simply stood. The calm on his face had hardened, transformed from passive observation into active, monumental resolve. He was no longer just a man in a showroom. He was a monument to dignity, and she had just called the storm that would wash everything, including herself, away. The point of no return wasn't just crossed. It had been obliterated. Time, in the wake of Margaret's shouted accusation, underwent a strange metamorphosis. It didn't simply slow, it congealed, turning the showroom into a diorama of suspended animation. The cheerful music from the speakers now sounded teeny and absurd, a soundtrack utterly divorced from the scene it scored. Employees were frozen at their desks, hands paused over keyboards, eyes locked forward, afraid to move or even breathe too loudly. The only signs of life were the slight, rapid rise and fall of Margaret's chest and the imperceptible, steady calm in Taryn's posture. Margaret, desperate to clothe her nuclear decision in the garb of normalcy, attempted to reclaim her managerial mantle. She smoothed the front of her blazer with palms that trembled slightly, lifted her chin, and began a stiff, deliberate walk back toward her glass office. Each click of her heel was meant to sound decisive, but it echoed in the silence like a faulty metronome. She was trying to project the image of a leader who had dealt with a nuisance firmly and correctly, now returning to her important work. But her retreat felt like what it was, a retreat to a fortified position to await reinforcements. Taryn did not grant her the dignity of watching her go. Instead, he turned with a slow, considered motion and walked to a plush leather bench in the customer waiting area. He sat. Then, with a tranquility that bordered on the surreal, he took out his phone. He scrolled, his thumb moving at a leisurely pace, his face illuminated by the cool glow of the screen. He could have been waiting for a friend, for an oil change, for a latte. The sheer normalcy of the act was a devastating critique of her hysteria. The employees watched, their internal compasses spinning. Kyle, the young salesman, looked physically ill, his complexion ashen. The receptionist, a woman named Chloe, gnawed on a thumbnail, her eyes wide with a kind of horrified fascination. Two veteran salespeople, Ron and Deb, exchanged a single grave look over the tops of their cubicles. It was a look that said, "This is it. She's finally gone off the deep end." The unspoken consensus in the room had shifted. The disturbance was no longer Taryn. From behind her glass wall, Margaret watched him sit. His calm was an active, aggressive force against her. He was supposed to be pacing nervously or arguing at the door, or better yet, gone. His comfort was an insult. It unraveled the story she had built for the arriving police, the story of a threatening, disruptive trespasser. "Arrogant," she muttered to the empty office, the word hissing between her teeth. Just arrogant. The pneumatic hiss of the front doors broke the spell. An elderly couple, arms linked, stepped into the showroom, their faces bright with the cheerful purpose of a day out. The wall of tense silence hit them like a physical barrier. Their smiles wilted, confusion clouding their features. Margaret's head snapped toward the sound. Here was her prop, her proof of normalcy being interrupted. She burst from her office, a grotesque, smiling marionette. "Oh, welcome!" she chirped, her voice 2 octaves too high, the sound brittle and false. David!" she barked, beckoning frantically to a salesman. David, please assist these wonderful folks. Show them the new sedans." The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Evans, were gently but firmly shepherded away by a bewildered David. As they were led toward the far side of the showroom, Mr. Evans glanced back over his shoulder. His eyes met Taryn's. Taryn, looking up from his phone, offered the old man a small, polite, almost apologetic smile. It was a moment of silent communication between two humans in the midst of madness. Mr. Evans's expression shifted from confusion to a deep, troubled concern. He saw not a threat, but a man wronged. This silent exchange was the final straw for Kyle's conscience. He couldn't remain complicit. He moved on shaky legs to the slightly ajar door of Margaret's office. "In, Ms. Sinclair, ma'am," he whispered, urgent and low. Are you sure about this? He's just sitting there." Margaret turned on him, her eyes glacial. "I am sure," she said, each word an ice chip. He was given every chance. He's choosing to make a scene. "We don't negotiate with people who try to intimidate us." She had fully rewritten history now, casting herself as the besieged defender and Taryn as the calculating aggressor. Kyle nodded, a hollow motion, and retreated, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his own powerlessness. Then through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the glint of sunlight on a white and black patrol car. Then a second, they pulled into the lot with silent, ominous grace, lights off, but their authority undeniable. A wave of palpable relief washed over Margaret, the cavalry. Her validation. Her victory arriving in a crowned Victoria. She smoothed her hair, a gesture of final preparation. Taryn saw them too. He took a slow, deep breath, not a breath of fear, but of focus. He stood, placing his phone in his pocket. Then, with a deliberate, almost ceremonial motion, he buttoned the single button on his blazer. It was the gesture of a man preparing to meet his destiny, not flee from it. "Okay," he murmured to himself, a quiet affirmation. The two officers, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter, with an observant gaze, entered the showroom. Margaret was there instantly, a hostess greeting the main event. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm the manager." The tall officer gave a curt nod, his eyes already performing a tactical sweep of the room. "Ma'am, you reported a trespasser?" "Yes," Margaret said, gesturing with a dramatic flourish toward Taryn. "That man right there." She launched into a rehearsed summary, her voice a blend of professional distress and simmering outrage. "He's been asked politely, then firmly, to leave multiple times over the last half hour. He's refused. He's disrupting our business and unsettling customers and staff." The officer's eyes settled on Taryn. He stood calmly by the bench, hands now clasped loosely in front of him, a picture of quiet respectability. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not a disorderly trespasser. The two officers exchanged a brief, professional glance, a silent recalibration. This didn't fit the typical script. The shorter officer spoke, his tone neutral. "All right. We'll speak with him." As they approached, the entire dealership seemed to lean in, a single-held breath. Margaret followed, hovering just behind their shoulders, her face a masterpiece of anticipation, waiting for the moment her truth would be confirmed and enforced. The tall officer stopped before Taryn. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Can you tell us your side of things?" Taryn's voice was clear, respectful, and devoid of any defensiveness. "Of course, officer." The final, quiet act was about to begin. The air in the showroom, already thick with anticipation, seemed to solidify into a clear, silent resin, trapping everyone within it. The two officers formed a professional wall between Taryn and the rest of the room, their bodies language neutral, their faces masks of procedural attentiveness. Margaret stood just behind their shoulders, a phantom of her former self, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on Taryn with the intensity of a hunter watching trapped prey. Every employee, from the ashamed Kyle to the veteran Ron, was a statue. The elderly Mr. and Mrs. Evans had stopped pretending to look at sedans. They stood openly watching, their faces etched with concern. Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Can you tell us your side of things?" The tall officer's voice was even, a tool for extracting facts. Taryn's response was a masterclass in clarity. "Of course, officer." His voice was respectful but carried an undeniable weight of truth. "I walked into this dealership to look at cars. I've asked no one for a test drive, nor have I disrupted any business. I've simply been observing. Apparently that's enough to warrant a call to you." The logical, maddening simplicity of his statement hung in the air. Margaret's control snapped. "You were asked to leave? Multiple times?" "And you refused. That's trespassing. That's why we're here." Her words were sharp, desperate to corral the narrative back into the narrow chute of her version of events. The shorter officer raised a placating hand, not even turning to look at her. "We'll handle this, ma'am." The gesture, polite but firm, was a seismic shift. It gently but definitively removed the baton of authority from her hand. She was relegated to the role of complainant, not commander. A flicker of panic, sharp and cold, darted behind her eyes. Taryn gave a small, acknowledging nod to the officer. "Fridale's sake, reason." Then, moving with a slow, deliberate care that broadcasted non-threat, he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. The tall officer watched closely. "Sir, just take it easy." "Of course," Taryn said calmly. "I just want to clear up any confusion." His fingers emerged not with a wallet or ID, but with a slim, black leather card holder. From it, he extracted a single piece of paper folded crisply into thirds. It was heavy, cream-colored stock, the kind used for formal documents. "This should clarify the situation," he said, and offered it to the tall officer. The officer took it, his brow creasing slightly in routine curiosity. He unfolded it with a soft rustle that was deafening in the silence. His eyes began their left-to-right scan. For a second, there was nothing, just an officer reading a document. Then his eyes stopped. They jumped back to the top of the page. His posture, previously loose and ready, subtly straightened. The professional neutrality on his face melted into a mixture of surprise and dawning comprehension. His eyes lifted from the paper to Taryn's face, searching, comparing the man before him to the words on the page. He looked back down as if to confirm, then handed the document to his partner without a word. The shorter officer took it, his scan quicker. His reaction was less contained. His eyebrows climbed his forehead, his lips parted. He looked from the paper to Taryn, his expression one of pure, unvarnished astonishment. He stammered, the sentence dying as he simply pointed from the document to the man. Taryn stood silently, offering only a single calm, confirming nod. The tall officer cleared his throat, his voice now layered with a new formality and a distinct undercurrent of apology. "Sir, it appears there's been a significant misunderstanding." Margaret heard the word "a misunderstanding" like a lifeline. The fog of her impending dread parted for a second. She took a wobbly step forward. "Misunderstanding? What misunderstanding? Officers, what is that?" Her voice was pitched high with a desperate need to know. The shorter officer finally acknowledged her, but only by answering the question he knew Taryn could answer for himself. He looked directly at Taryn, voicing the reality for the entire room to hear. "You're the new owner of South Point Motors?" The words did not echo, but they seemed to replicate themselves, bouncing from mind to mind in the showroom. A collective sharp gasp sliced through the silence. Someone dropped a pen. The clatter was like a gunshot. All eyes swiveled to Margaret. The transformation was horrifying and complete. The furious crimson flush that had dominated her face vanished, draining away so fast it left her looking bloodless, waxy. Her eyes, once narrowed with contempt, were now wide, uncomprehending saucers. Her jaw went slack. She took an involuntary half-step back, her body moving on autopilot, her hand flailing out behind her until her fingers found the sharp edge of a sales desk. She gripped it, her knuckles bleaching white, the only thing holding her upright. Taryn finally turned the full force of his attention upon her. The polite mask was gone. In its place was the calm, unyielding gaze of judgment, of absolute authority. He did not smirk. He did not gloat. He simply stated the facts into the void her mind had become. "I finalized the acquisition last week. I decided to visit today, unannounced, to see how things run on a typical day." The tall officer, understanding his role in this drama, had just concluded, addressed Taryn with deference. Sir, we'll step aside unless you need any further assistance from us. No, officers, I appreciate your professionalism. Thank you for coming out, Taryn replied, his tone making it clear the thanks were genuine, and the incident, from their perspective, was closed. As the officers turned to leave, the tall one passed Margaret. He paused for a millisecond, his eyes meeting hers. In that look was a universe of meaning, reproach, a severe disappointment, and a profound, professional pity. It was the final external confirmation of her catastrophic error. Then he walked out, the doors sighing shut behind them. And there they were, Taryn standing in the center of the floor, the folded document of ownership now a simple prop in his hand, and Margaret, a broken figure clinging to a desk, the architecture of her career and her self-importance lying in ruins at her feet. The revelation was complete. The only thing left was the fallout. The silence that followed the officer's departure was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a thick, viscous atmosphere that filled the showroom, pressing down on everyone within it. It was the silence of a breath held too long, of a verdict read, but not yet acknowledged. The gentle hum of the fluorescent lights became a roar. The distant, muffled traffic from the boulevard transformed into a dull, accusatory thrum. Taryn stood at the epicenter of this new, shattered world. He did not move. He simply allowed the truth he had unveiled to expand, to fill every corner of the room, to seep into the very polish of the floors. He was no longer the unassuming browser or the polite nuisance. He was the source of gravity in the room, and everything now orbited around him. Margaret remained anchored to the sales desk, her fingers still dug into its laminate edge like claws on a cliff face. The initial shock that had blanched her face was now giving way to a slow, creeping horror, a physiological thaw of dread. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on Taryn, but they didn't seem to see him. They saw the abyss that had just opened at her feet. Her chest hitched with a ragged, shaky inhale that sounded less like breath and more like the first gasp of a drowning woman. Around them, the staff began to stir from their paralysis. It was a slow-motion unraveling. Chloe, the receptionist, brought a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening with a potent mix of shock and a strange, sympathetic pain. Kyle finally lifted his head from the study of his shoes, his expression one of profound sorrow, as if he had witnessed an avoidable accident he'd been powerless to stop. The veteran salespeople, Ron and Deb, exchanged a long, weary look. It was a look that said, "We knew her arrogance would catch up to her. We just never imagined this." The first meaningful movement came from the periphery. Mr. and Mrs. Evans disentangled themselves from their bewildered salesman. They did not speak. They simply walked with a quiet, dignified purpose toward the center of the room. They stopped a few paces from Taryn, not intruding but bearing witness. Their faces were etched, not with curiosity, but with a deep human compassion and a clear moral alignment. They were the audience that had seen the entire play, and their presence silently judged the antagonist. The sound of their footsteps seemed to break the spell holding Margaret's voice. "Oh, wait, what?" The words were a dry, papery whisper, crumbling as they left her lips. She swallowed convulsively, the sound painfully loud. This can't be right. There was a desperate, childlike hope in her tone, a plea for the world to reorder itself to her understanding. With a visible effort, she pushed herself upright, releasing her death grip on the desk. She swayed slightly, her balance as compromised as her authority. Her voice gained a pathetic, reedy strength. "You, the owner?" Taryn did not rush to answer. With a calm that was itself a form of violence, he refolded the cream-colored document, the crisp edges aligning perfectly, and slid it back into his inner pocket. The action was a period at the end of her sentence. The proof was put away. The fact remained. He then turned his entire body to face her, a general finally addressing a defeated foe. "Is it so difficult to believe?" he asked. His voice was not raised. It was calm, probing, lethally analytical. The question was not rhetorical. It was a surgical instrument, designed to expose the infected root of the entire conflict, her ingrained bias. Margaret flinched, her body recoiling as if from a physical blow. "I didn't know," she stammered, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears. "No one told me. We had a new owner." Taryn took a single measured step forward. His calm was now a terrifying force, a glacier of certainty advancing. "And that justifies how you treated me?" he asked, his voice still low. How quickly you assumed I didn't belong here." Margaret's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. Her eyes darted around the room in a frantic animal panic, searching the faces of her staff for a lifeline, for even a flicker of solidarity. She found none. Only a gallery of stunned faces, some already turning away in shame, not for themselves, but for her. Taryn continued, his question expanding in scope, becoming an indictment of her entire tenure. Tell me, Margaret." He used her name not as an address, but as a label for a failing system. "How many other customers have you treated like this? Because of what you thought?" The question landed with the force of a revelation. This was no longer about one bad call. It was about a pattern, a toxic filter through which she had likely viewed the world for years. The professional facade she had clung to finally crumbled. Her face seemed to collapse in on itself, features dissolving into a mask of pure, unvarnished anguish. She could not meet his eyes. Her gaze dropped to the shiny, reflective toe of her own expensive pump as if seeing her own distorted reflection for the first time. I was just doing my job," she mumbled to the floor, the words a pathetic, rote defense, protecting the dealership. This time, Taryn's voice changed. It did not grow louder, but it sharpened, acquiring a keener, more cutting edge. It was the sound of final judgment. "Your job?" he repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air, rotten and empty. "It was your job to profile? To disrespect? To call the police on a man for the crime of observation?" He took another step closer. He was not invading her space to intimidate, but to ensure she felt the full, unshielded weight of his condemnation. "I came here today to see how this dealership operates. What I've seen is a manager who confuses prejudice with protocol, who trades decency for a false sense of control. A single hot tear betrayed her, escaping the dam of her pride and carving a clean track through her makeup. She did not wipe it away. She was past such vanities. She was exposed utterly and completely before the empire she had built and now lost. Her voice, when it came, was thick, choked, reduced to its most primal essence. "I'm sorry." Taryn let the word hang in the heavy air. He considered it, dissecting its hollow apology. "A sorry?" He shook his head slowly, a gesture of profound, irrevocable negation. "A sorry isn't a reset button. Sorry doesn't undo the spectacle you created, the fear you tried to instill, the disrespect you showed not just to me but to the very idea of this business." He turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the silent, watching staff. His voice lifted, now addressing the room, claiming it. "This is not what this company stands for. Not under my ownership." Then his piercing focus returned to Margaret. The moment of sentencing had arrived. His voice dropped back to a terrible conversational calm. "You built a reputation on efficiency, Margaret, on results. Let me show you the most efficient result of your actions today." In his eyes, she saw no rage, no vengeful fire. She saw something far more devastating, the cold, clear, and absolute certainty of her end. The silence after Taryn's pronouncement was different now. It was no longer the silence of shock, but of an audience waiting for the final, inevitable curtain to fall. The space between him and Margaret seemed to vibrate with the energy of a decision already made, a sentence already passed. She stood before him not as a manager, not as an adversary, but simply as a person awaiting judgment, her face pale and slick with the tears of her own unraveling. Taryn broke the agonizing gaze first. He turned his body slowly, a sovereign addressing his court, his gaze sweeping over the frozen tableau of salespeople, receptionists, and the watchful elderly couple. His voice, when it came, was not the loud, blustering command of a new tyrant, but the clear, measured tone of someone establishing a fundamental law. "Let me make one thing clear to everyone here," he began, his words carving themselves into the quiet. "I'm not just the new owner. I'm someone who believes in treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or how they look." The statement was simple, profound, and a direct repudiation of everything that had just transpired. It landed on the staff not as a threat, but as a promise. Some of the stiffness left their postures. Kyle's downcast eyes lifted, a flicker of something like hope igniting in them. But for Margaret, each word was a nail. She stared at the broad line of Taryn's back as he spoke to her team, and felt the last vestiges of her identity in that place dissolve. He turned back to her. The focus was terrifying in its totality. "You," he said, the pronoun in indictment, "were the leader of this dealership. You were supposed to set an example. He took one final, deliberate step closer. He didn't need to shout. The proximity, the low, steady resonance of his voice was more powerful than any scream. But instead of leading, you allowed your assumptions to lead you. You didn't see a person. You saw a stereotype and you acted on it. A weak, wounded sound escaped Margaret's lips. It was the ghost of her former authority. "I've worked here for over 10 years. She managed, the statement a crumbling plea for clemency based on time served. "I've always done what's best for the dealership." Taryn's response was swift, a surgeon's scalpel slicing through sentimental tissue to reach the cancerous truth beneath. "Is that what you think this was?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "A best for the dealership?" Calling the police on a potential customer? Publicly humiliating someone for the crime of browsing? He shook his head, a gesture of ultimate negation. "You didn't protect this business, Margaret. You poisoned it." The accusation, "poisoned it," struck with physical force. Her shoulders, already slumped, seemed to collapse inward entirely. The proud, rigid spine that had carried her through a decade of sales meetings and profit reviews finally broke. She was just a woman in a nice blazer, crying in the middle of the floor. "I'm so sorry," she wept, the words this time raw and unchecked, born of true devastation rather than strategy. Taryn regarded her tears. His expression didn't harden with cruelty, but it didn't soften with forgiveness either. It remained tragically, mercifully firm. "Sorry isn't enough," he said, the words final and absolute. "Not for this." The finality triggered a primal panic in her. The professional was gone. Only the desperate animal remained. "Please," she implored, taking a half step forward, her hands coming together in an unconscious, pleading gesture. "I didn't know. If I had known it was you," he cut her off, his voice flattening into something as hard and cold as iron. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to know. That's the problem, Margaret. And it's a problem I can't overlook. Don't let this one moment erase everything I've done." She cried, her voice rising in a final, frantic bid for salvation. For the first time, a trace of something like pity touched Taryn's eyes. But it was the pity one might feel for a driver who, through arrogance, has crashed their own car. It didn't change the wreckage. "This isn't about erasing what you've done," he explained, his tone almost gentle in its harsh truth. "It's about accountability. Actions have consequences. And right now, you're facing them." He turned his body once more to the room, his posture squaring. He was no longer speaking to her. He was making a proclamation. As of this moment, his voice rang out, clear and declarative. "Margaret Sinclair is no longer the manager of South Point Motors." The words, made official, released a wave of palpable reaction, a collective, sharp intake of breath, a muffled gasp from Chloe. The expected had become real. A strangled, wounded noise was wrenched from Margaret's throat. Her hands flew to her face, but they could not stifle the shuddering sob that racked her frame. She was disappearing in front of them, dissolving into the consequence of her own making. "Lai will be personally overseeing operations," Taryn continued, his gaze on his new staff, "until we find a new manager. Someone who embodies the values of respect and integrity we will operate by from now on." Finally, he looked back at the broken woman before him. His voice dropped, becoming quiet, almost intimate. It was not a threat. It was a final, grim gift of clarity. Take this as a lesson, Margaret. Assumptions can destroy more than just a moment. They can destroy trust, respect, and opportunity. He then gestured not with a pointed finger, but with a gentle, open hand toward the gleaming glass doors. "You can go." Margaret lowered her trembling hands. Her makeup was a ruined landscape, her eyes red and shattered. She looked at Taryn one last time, a final, wordless search for a stay of execution. She found none, only the implacable truth of her own actions reflected back at her. Her eyes fell. With a weak, almost imperceptible nod of surrender, she turned. The sound was the most telling detail. The once authoritative, intimidating click-click-click of her heels was gone, replaced by a soft, shuffling scrape, the sound of someone unsure of the ground beneath them. She did not look at Cale, at Chloe, at Ron, or Deb. She walked with her head bowed, a phantom passing through the world she had once ruled, past the car she had sold, toward the exit. The automatic doors hissed open, admitting a slash of late afternoon sun. She stepped into it, a silhouette for a second, and then was gone. The doors sighed shut, sealing her out. Taryn stood alone in the center of the silence she had left behind, the architect of a new order standing amidst the rubble of the old. The heavy glass doors sighed shut, sealing away the ghost of Margaret Sinclair and the toxic era she represented. In her wake, a profound and fragile silence descended upon the showroom of South Point Motors. It was not the same tense silence that had preceded the police arrival. This was the hollow, ringing quiet after a explosion, where the dust is still settling and the new shape of the landscape is just becoming visible. Taryn stood at its epicenter, a solitary figure amidst the gleaming cars and polished floors. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders, not as a burden but as a mantle he had consciously chosen to accept. Around him, the staff remained frozen, a gallery of shell-shocked expressions. Their eyes were fixed on him, brimming with a volatile cocktail of emotions. Residual shock, deep-seated anxiety about their own futures, and, in a few like Kyle, a tentative, flickering hope. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the new regime to reveal itself as just another form of tyranny. Taryn understood this. He let the silence hold for a beat longer, then offered them a small, weary, but genuine smile, a human expression in the wake of inhuman drama. "I know," he began, his voice calm, compassionate, yet carrying an undeniable core of strength that filled the space, that what just happened was uncomfortable to watch. He took a few steps toward the center of the group, his hands open at his sides, his posture non-threatening. Shoot, it was uncomfortable to be a part of, and I know some of you are probably sitting there wondering what this means. For this place, for your jobs, for tomorrow. He paused, allowing his words to resonate, to connect with the unspoken fears tightening every throat in the room. He saw subtle nods, the briefest lowering of guarded eyes, confirmation that he had named their collective dread. "So let me reassure you," he continued, his tone firming with conviction, this isn't about tearing anything down. It's about building something better. It's about starting fresh. Today." From the cluster of salespeople, Kyle's hand rose, tentative as a sapling in a storm. Taryn nodded toward him, an open invitation. Sir, if I may?" Kyle's voice was hushed but clear. Some of us, we've seen things like that before. But we didn't feel like we could say anything. What should we do if we see something wrong? Going forward, Taryn's expression softened with genuine appreciation. This question, born from the ashes of the old culture, was the first crucial brick of the new foundation. Thank you for asking that," he said, his voice warming. "That's exactly the right question." He shifted his gaze to encompass everyone. The seasoned vets, the junior staff, the support team. If you ever see anything at all, that goes against the values of respect and simple human dignity we're going to stand for here, I want you to speak up. To me, to your new manager when they start. To each other, your voice isn't just welcome, it's essential. He made deliberate eye contact with several employees, with Chloe, who still looked shaken, with Ron, the veteran whose cynicism was a well-worn armor, with a young detailer hovering near the back. Your voice matters," he repeated, each word a pledge. "This isn't just my dealership anymore. It's ours, and it's up to all of us to protect its reputation, and more importantly, to protect the people inside it." A visible, physical wave of relief passed through the room. It was in the unclenching of jaws, the slow release of breath held too long, the straightening of spines that had spent years subtly cowed. The atmosphere shifted palpably, the charged anxiety melting into a clear, purposeful potential. Chloe offered a small, real smile. Taryn broke the moment with a single, sharp clap of his hands, a sound not of anger, but of decisive energy, a starter's pistol for a new race. "Now," he said, his voice brightening, "let's get back to work. We have customers in this building right now who walked in expecting a great experience today." He gestured warmly toward the elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Evans, who had remained as respectful witnesses through it all. "And we are not going to let them down." The spell shattered into action. The frozen tableau sprang to life. Salespeople turned to clients with renewed focus. Phones were answered with fresh vigor. The low hum of genuine, unforced conversation began to rebuild the sonic landscape of the showroom. The heartbeat of the business, which had faltered and nearly stopped, resumed, stronger, steadier, and healthier than before. As Taryn turned, Mr. Evans approached, his wife's hand tucked in the crook of his arm. The old man extended a weathered, steady hand. His eyes, deep-set and wise, held Taryn's gaze. "Young man," he said, his voice a warm, gravelly rumble, "I don't know who you are, but you handled that with more grace than most men have in their whole bodies. It's good to see. It's damn good to see someone stand up for what's right and do it without losing their own humanity in the process." Taryn took the offered hand, feeling the firm, honest grip. The validation coming from this impartial third party touched him more deeply than he expected. "Thank you, sir," he replied, his own grip firm and respectful. "That means a great deal to hear." "Truly." Mrs. Evans reached out and patted Taryn's arm, her touch light, but sure. "Ah, you've got good bones here," she said, her eyes scanning the showroom with a knowing look. "Don't let anyone tell you different. Just had to clear out some rot so the good wood could breathe." Taryn nodded, profoundly moved by their kindness. The couple smiled, then turned, waving off a salesman who moved to assist them. They chose instead to simply exit, carrying the story of what they had witnessed out into the world. Taryn watched them go. He was alone again, but for the first time since he'd walked in, he did not feel solitary. He was surrounded by the energy of renewal. He saw Kyle, his posture confident now, enthusiastically pointing out a safety feature to a young family. He saw Chloe laughing genuinely at something a customer said. He saw not just employees, but potential allies in building something worthy. He hadn't come for a confrontation, but sometimes he reflected, the truth demands one. You cannot build on a foundation of sand and lies. You must first clear the rubble. He walked slowly to the vast floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the showroom. Outside, the rows of cars were painted in the long amber light of the setting sun. He placed his hands in his pockets, a man now surveying not just an inventory of metal and glass, but a field of possibility. The crisis was over. The delicate, challenging, and hopeful work of real creation was just beginning. The late afternoon had softened the harsh, revealing sun of the confrontation, yielding to the gentle, gilded glow of early evening. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of South Point Motors, casting long, elegant shadows across the showroom floor and painting the rows of cars in tones of honey and amber. The space was still active, but the energy had undergone a fundamental transfusion. The frantic, fear-tinged buzz was gone, replaced by a focused, respectful hum. Conversations were earnest, not performative. Laughter, when it came, was genuine, not forced. Taryn stood by the window, hands in his pockets, observing this new ecosystem begin to find its rhythm. The storm had passed, and the air was clear, charged with potential. He watched Kyle with the young family, noting how the young salesman knelt to speak to the little boy at eye level, explaining a feature on the car before turning his attention to the parents. It was patient. It was engaged. It was the antithesis of the dismissive efficiency that had ruled minutes before. Taryn's own sharp edges from the confrontation had smoothed into a deep, contemplative stillness. He hadn't come for a revolution, but he had been handed the reins of one. The lesson was not merely about one woman's prejudice. It was a masterclass in how silent complicity allows toxicity to become culture. Turning from the window, he began a slow patrol of his new domain. As he moved, employees glanced up. Their looks were no longer furtive or fearful. They were acknowledgments, respectful, curious, some still wary, but all devoid of the previous dread. He saw the healthy fear of people who want to do well for a leader they respect, not the terror of those trying to avoid the whims of a tyrant. Chloe caught his eye from the reception desk just as she finished a call, her voice having been noticeably cheerful. "It already feels different in here, sir," she said, her expression open. "Fighter." Taryn offered a warm, approving smile. Good, that's the point." The weight we're lifting wasn't the cars, it was the atmosphere. He continued his walk, his footsteps silent on the tile, until he found himself standing on the exact spot where Margaret's voice had first sliced through the air towards him. He looked down, half expecting to see a scorch mark, a scar in the polish. There was only the reflection of the ceiling lights. This was where a world built on assumption had collided with the immovable wall of reality, and reality had won. He pulled out his phone and opened his Notes app. The clinical observational entries from earlier stared back at him. A frontline engagement, hostile filter, premium display, QC issue, staff morale, watchful, anxious. He scrolled down and created a new entry. His thumbs moved deliberately. Post-confrontation audit 1730 HRS. Energy is recalibrating. Fear has shifted from capricious authority to shared accountability. Foundation for trust is present, but fragile. First operational tasks, formalize open door policy. Source quality bias and customer service training for all. Meet with senior staff individually tomorrow. He was no longer just an observer or a crisis manager. He was a strategist architecting a rebuild on a salvaged foundation. His gaze lifted to the glass-walled office at the back of the showroom. The throne of the old regime. The chair was empty, the desk unnaturally neat. A title on a door didn't make a leader, he knew. Leadership was deposited daily into an account built on trust through consistent, respectful action. It was earned on the floor, not commanded from a tower. Before he could move, Ron, the veteran salesman with the weary eyes, approached. He held 2 steaming paper cups. He offered one to Taryn. "A black, I assumed," Ron said, then added with a wry, apologetic smile, "Might be my last bad assumption of the day." Taryn accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Ron. And don't worry, we're all unlearning something today." Ron sighed, following Taryn's gaze around the room. "She was good at moving metal," he said quietly, a blunt epitaph for a decade of leadership. "But she was terrible with people. For a long time, we were told the first part was all that mattered." Taryn took a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. "It's the only part that lasts, Ron," he replied. "Of the people. The cars will sell themselves if the people inside this building, staff and customers, feel seen and valued." Ron absorbed this, his face lined with years of practiced cynicism, softening into something resembling hope. He gave a slow, decisive nod, raised his cup in a silent toast, and returned to his desk, his step a fraction lighter. Taryn finally walked toward the glass office. He stopped at the threshold but did not enter. He simply stood there, looking at the empty chair. It was just a room now. A space to be cleansed and repurposed. His first act as owner wouldn't be to claim that symbolic seat of power. It would be to dismantle the very mindset that made it a seat of fear. He turned his back on it, choosing instead to lean against a sales desk on the main floor, sipping his coffee, present and accessible. The day's final transaction concluded with the young family. Kyle walked them to the door, shaking hands, receiving a smile from the parents and an excited wave from the boy. Taryn watched them disappear into the twilight, a quiet sense of satisfaction warming him more than the coffee. This was the product. Not the car they might buy, but the dignity of the experience. He set his empty cup down, walked to the main light panel, and dimmed the showroom lights by half. The space transformed again from an arena of commerce to a serene, warm-hued gallery. It was a symbolic gesture of visual lowering of the curtain on the day's drama and an invitation to the calm of a fresh start. The front doors, Taryn paused. He looked back over the showroom, the clean lines of the cars sleeping in the dim light, the orderly desks awaiting tomorrow, the space finally freed from the long, toxic shadow that had haunted it. His own reflection was faint in the dark glass, a ghost superimposed on the legacy he now had to build. He gave a single, slow nod, not of triumph, but of acceptance and resolve. Then he pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool, quiet evening air. He did not look like a conqueror who had taken a kingdom. He looked like a steward who had finally cleared the weeds, ready for the long, careful, honest work of tending what could now grow.